Good evening, everyone. I'm Ed Gallagher. I'm president of the American-Scandinavian Foundation, and it's a great, great pleasure to welcome you to our headquarters here, Scandinavia House, the Nordic Center in America, for this very special evening, which is the kickoff for this conference we have, the Climate Action Future Changes Arctic Indigenous Film. Tonight we have a panel exploring this topic, and it's a big topic to explore with a number of distinguished speakers, and tomorrow we'll be showing a number of films, so I hope you'll be back with us tomorrow. Also, we're currently presenting here at Scandinavia House a wonderful exhibition called Arctic Highways, which presents the work of 12 Indigenous artists from Sápmi, Canada, and Alaska, who have each dealt with the issues of climate and so many other issues that face us these days in a wonderful set of works. Those are on the third floor gallery, so it will be open this evening after the panel, so if you'd like to go up and take a look. Also, after the panel, there will be a reception taking place in our second floor Volvo Hall, so please join us for that. But we're very, very pleased to have you all with us, and I'd like to now introduce Anna Hoover, who is the Director, CEO of the International Sámi Film Institute, in Kautokeino, and she just arrived here yesterday, and it's great to have you with us, and I welcome you. Thank you.
Yes, dear guests, yes, I had to do a little yoik because this evening is a dream coming true for us at the Sámi Film Institute. We have been talking about coming here to New York and do a collaboration and a side event in connection with the UN Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues. So it's wonderful to be here tonight at Scandinavia House with our wonderful partners. And so the Arctic is our homeland, and it is homeland to many indigenous peoples all across the Arctic. And our ancestors, they have been telling stories around the fire, and they have survived for centuries. And today, when we are facing the challenges and the scary scenarios of climate change, I think we need our stories and our storytellers more than ever. Because film is a powerful medium, and with film we can make our stories heard. And home in Sápmi today, we are facing many challenges with green colonialism, fighting windmills, industries. And these are now the new threat to our traditions, to our homelands, and to our traditional livelihoods. So we indigenous peoples, we need a strong voice in this development. And as I said, film can give that to us. And this is also the reason why we, in 2018, established the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund with partners to support Arctic Indigenous filmmakers and their stories. And today, we see a growing interest in Indigenous stories. There has never been so much interest. And we work with Netflix, Oscar Academy, and Disney, to name a few. So I would urge every Indigenous person in this room to take your camera or your phone and tell your story, because we do need everyone's stories today. And in our stories, there is everything. It is our connection to our ancestors, to our land, to our spirits, to our languages, and to our cultures. Everything, our lives are in our stories. So that's my encouragement. tell stories and make films. So, Giihtu, thank you. Thank you all for coming here tonight. It means a lot to us. So then I want to introduce our distinguished speakers. And I will just mention you all now, and then you just come up. I don't come in between and tell who you are. So, Mr. Dario Meija Montalvo, Chair of the Permanent Forum for Indigenous Issues. It's a great honor that you are here tonight. Mr. Asla Holmberg, President of the Sámi Council. Also a great honor. Thank you for coming. And Mr. Petteri Vuorimäki, Ambassador for Arctic Affairs, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Finland. Welcome to all of you. So I will now invite Mr. Dario Meija Montalvo to the stage. Giihtu.
Muy buenas noches. Para mí es un honor estar aquí con ustedes en esta tarde muy hermosa, muy tranquila. Además, parece mucho al territorio Sámi.
So good evening to all of you. It is really an honor and a pleasure to be here with you this evening. It's a very calm and tranquil evening, and it looks a lot like the Sámi people.
Yo recuerdo mucho mi oportunidad que tuve de estar en el territorio Sámi hace ya 3 años. Y no pude ver todas las estaciones, pero pude ver una película de cómo era el territorio Sámi en un tiempo distinto en el que yo estuve allí.
So I remember very well my opportunity that I had to visit the Sámi territories. It was 3 years ago, and obviously I didn't get to be there to see all the seasons, but I did see a film that was about how the Sámis live in their different seasons.
En la película vi mucha tranquilidad, pero también una convivencia muy fuerte de los Sámi con los mosquitos.
And I also remember that the film, you have a very peaceful life, but you also have to live with the mosquitoes.
Y ustedes me han invitado a esta tarde para comentar sobre el papel de los pueblos indígenas frente al cambio climático. Pero quizás ustedes ya lo han dicho, en el foro permanente yo escuché la voz muy fuerte de la juventud Sámi, que dijo que si el costo para resolver los asuntos del cambio climático era entregar la cultura y los territorios indígenas, entonces, ¿qué hacemos acá?
So I thank you for inviting me here, and I realize that I've been listening to what you've been saying about the risk that the role that Indigenous peoples have with climate change, and I listened to the very loud voice of the young people, the young Sámi people, of what they have been saying at the Permanent Forum, and they said that if the cost is that they have to give up their culture and their territory of Indigenous peoples, that's something that they're not willing to do.
Y esa es la voz que le corresponde a los pueblos indígenas, ese es su principal papel, cuidar el territorio, como lo dije en mi discurso inaugural de esta sesión, pero cuidar el territorio desde el corazón, no desde el pensamiento.
So I've been listening to the voice of Indigenous peoples, and it is really important for us to take care of our lands and our territory, as I mentioned in my inaugural speech, how important it is for us to take care of our territories, but we really have to do it from our hearts and not from our mind or our thoughts.
Estamos bastante acostumbrados a que las soluciones deben venir del pensamiento, pero a nosotros nos han enseñado que el primer órgano que se creó en la creación antes que el pensamiento fue el corazón.
So we are accustomed to being taught that solutions really come from the mind, from our thoughts. But for us, the very first thing that we were taught is that the first organ that was created was not the mind, but the heart.
Y desde el corazón, yo estoy seguro que es de donde se cuentan las historias. Las historias que ustedes están contando en las películas no vienen del pensamiento, vienen del corazón. Y están hechas para las futuras generaciones y para otras personas del mundo desde el corazón.
So I am sure that the stories that you are telling really come from the heart. These are stories that you are sharing in film. They do not come from the mind, but they come from the heart that you will share with future generations as well as other peoples from your heart.
Porque en la otro lado del mundo, en los pueblos indígenas de la Amazonía, los ancianos dicen que por cada historia que se cuenta, se retrasa un día el fin del mundo.
So on the other side of the world, in the Amazon, the elders say that for every story that's told, the end of the world is set back by one day.
Usted ha contribuido con un poquito más de vida al planeta.
So you have contributed to a little bit more life to the earth.
Y este es el papel del foro permanente, amplificar las voces de los pueblos indígenas y llamar la atención a los estados para que estos sistemas de conocimiento no sean dejados atrás.
So this is the role of the Permanent Forum. It is to amplify the voices of Indigenous peoples, and it's really to call the attention of the states so that we can make this knowledge be amplified.
Por eso yo estoy muy honrado de que me hayan invitado esta tarde y deseo que como estas haya muchas otras historias que se puedan contar, porque ese es el trabajo que hacemos los pueblos indígenas en todo el mundo. De verdad, muchas gracias por la invitación.
So it has really been an honor to be here this evening, and I hope that many more stories will be told, because that's the work of Indigenous peoples. It's to tell our stories to the world, for them to be heard around the world. Thank you for having me.
Gracias.
Yang o yo na leong go yo na leong le na le wan o yo nu yo leong le nya le yo na leong go yo na leong go yo leong lo yo nu yo te dan leve to lo ki ko kirta she yo na le yo na lo leong lo yo nu yo leong le yang lo yo na leong go yo na leong lo yo leong lo yo nu yo hey na le yo na leong go yo na leong lo yo leong lo yo nu yo. Kiitos. Because Anna was joiking, I couldn't do any less well than she. Kiitos luodis. Puerre ehkä pohkaita. Good evening everybody also on my behalf. This was karja, crow's joik, and the only word that it has is karja, and levetologi kirtashi. Levetologi is a feather of good luck. So with this I bring good luck to this event. So also on behalf of the Sámi Council, very warm welcome to this event. And thank you for ISFI for inviting us to co-host this event. It's about fifth time I am here in the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And it's one of the most important arenas globally for Indigenous peoples to gather and share our concerns, solutions, do networking. And when I started to come here, I came as a youth delegate, and I think Permanent Forum played an important role for me in making connections to other indigenous peoples around the world, and learning that we live in this global indigenous community and share a lot of the challenges, but also the solutions. Yes, so why are we here, both in this arena and in the Permanent Forum? We are one of the reasons is that we are here to share our experiences and tell stories, and I think this is what filmmakers also essentially are. They are storytellers. I have myself also made 2 short films, and for me it is one of the methods for me to tell the same things that I would be telling in the Permanent Forum or whatever arena I am at. So it's about describing our situation, about how do we respond, raise awareness about our situation. And of course, climate change is one of the greatest threats of our time, the greatest, you could say. And I would say that filmmakers are an important part of raising our issues, bringing our stories from the Arctic to the broader audience. And as I see, artists are experts in expressing issues in a way that impacts people's feelings, and then you really remember these stories. So yeah, awareness raising, and I would say our artists play a very essential role in this. Yeah, I think I'll close there, and Petteri, maybe you also start with the song.
I was afraid that Aslak might say that. If I was able to yoke, I certainly would. I wonder if there are any simple ones that my Sámi friends could teach me. I'd be very anxious to learn. It's a great personal honor to be here and to be able to say a few words. I know that everybody in the United Nations say that I will be brief, but I think the Finns are the only people who actually mean it when they say that they will be brief. I will essentially make 3 brief points, but before doing that, I just want to say that on Wednesday evening, very late, I arrived and I left the hotel in search of a bottle of water. And I went to the street, and basically the first person that I saw was Pirita Näkkäläjärvi from the Finnish Sámi Parliament. Now, what are the odds on that? New York is supposed to be one of the biggest cities in the world. Then very early in the same following morning, I got out, jet-lagged, and Icelandic Arctic ambassador was standing at the one street corner, and I went to him and said, "Hi, good morning, you were up early." And he looked at me and said, "You don't believe this, but I just saw Sarah Olsvik from the Inuit Circumpolar Council. She was jogging down 2nd Avenue. So either New York is not such a big city, or the indigenous friends are all over the place. The first point that I'd like to make is that when one thinks, and certainly when I think, and I hope that when everybody thinks of the words indigenous peoples, the Arctic, and the climate change, that the first thought that comes to mind is the Arctic Council, where I have the honor of representing my country. The Arctic Council is the preeminent format for Arctic cooperation, for circumpolar Arctic cooperation. And I have, over the past years, and particularly over the last year, I have been all over the Arctic region making the point that the Arctic Council is important because of 3 reasons. 1, because of the Arctic governance. 2, because of the things that it has been doing for the past 27 years for the Arctic region. And thirdly, and I think probably most importantly, is because of the strong internationally unique position that indigenous peoples organizations, our esteemed permanent participants, have in the Arctic Council structures. I sit with them around the same table. And I think that's extremely important. The indigenous peoples are crucially important for the Arctic Council, and I hope and I trust that the Arctic Council is important for the indigenous peoples. The second point that I have made this before, and I shall continue to be making this point, is that insofar as the climate change is concerned, the indigenous peoples are absolutely at the front line. Whether one thinks of the salmon fishing at the Yukon River, the reindeer herding in Kautakiano, wildfires in the Quechin homeland, receding ice in Greenland, or the dramatic effects of thawing permafrost in the Russian Federation and North America. We, when I say we, I mean everybody, we need to respect them, and we have so much to learn from them and from the indigenous knowledge. As Jackie Sheffert, the Director of Climate Initiatives with Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, noted, and I quote, "We are our environment, no different than a seal or a polar bear. These changes ripple into our world as food security, food sovereignty, as well as wellness, our spirituality, and our well-being." I think that is a bold and insightful statement that certainly is very important to take note of. In the same vein, I would also recommend to everybody who has not read it, and I'm looking at the audience, I'm sure that many have, the Sámi Council published a fantastic report called The Climate Change in Sápmi, an overview and a path forward earlier this year. And I thank very much for my friend Gunn-Britt for having drawn my attention to the report, which I read with utmost interest. It's a fascinating and illuminating read, and all interested in the Arctic and the climate change in the Arctic must read that report. Because as has been said, if one is to truly understand the climate change globally, one has to understand climate change in the Arctic region. It offers fascinating insight into several themes such as fishing, berries, reindeer herding, health, and well-being, both physical and mental, adaptation, food security, and the report also includes very substantive and clear recommendations. Personally, I'm convinced that world might be a better place for all if everyone would subscribe to what the report stated. And I quote from the report. "In the Sámi cosmology, humans are seen as part of nature, not above other forms of life, where maintaining harmony within the ecosystem is the core value. Guiding principles are modesty, taking only what is needed, and respect towards other beings, both as individuals and as populations. This reciprocal relationship with nature is a key value which binds people to their environment, history, and heritage while benefiting from the gifts of nature. It also brings a responsibility to maintain a balance within the ecosystem and to safeguard the healthy environment as a foundation of all life." I hail the authors for their ability to write. That is a wonderful statement. Third and last point, I just said that my country has, over the recent years, attempted to make a series of legislative amendments relate to Sámi people in Finland. I refer first and foremost to the new Finnish Climate Act, where the provisions on a new Sámi Climate Council were elaborated. This will be a very important undertaking, and through the Sámi Climate Council, we hope that the Sámi traditional knowledge will be taken into account when preparing climate policy plans and measures. And the aim is to strengthen the dialogue between authorities, the scientific community, and Sámi people. As a civil servant, I try to stay away from political disputes in my country. That's not my responsibility. But I do say that when the previous government did not succeed in introducing the amendments to the provisions on the law on the Sámi parliament, I felt very disappointed and sad and embarrassed. We had a parliamentary election a couple of weeks back, and I do hope that the new parliament will finally finish that process. Let me conclude with one more citation, which I just read from Greta Thunberg. She said 2 days ago, and I quote, "Humanity is moving further and further into uncharted territory for us. This in itself is unprecedented, but what is even more unprecedented is the speed at which it's happening, and we keep accelerating." That's horrifying, and we all need to act, and we must act now. Thank you so much.
I would like to introduce the moderator of tonight's panel, Jason Ryle, who is a producer and an international programmer at Toronto International Film Festival for Indigenous Cinema. So please welcome Jason, who will introduce the panelists.
Hi, everyone. I'll take a seat in a second. But it's my pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a beautiful day outside, so thank you for coming to spend an hour with us down here in the basement. I'm Anishinaabe from Lake St. Martin First Nation, which is in central Canada. I'm not from the Arctic regions. My community is in southern Canada, which still many people think is, constantly covered in snow. Not quite the case. But I'm very honored and pleased to have spent most of my adult life in the company of Indigenous filmmakers from around the world. I worked at an organization called Imaginative for 18 years in various capacities, and it was one of the best educations I've had in my life, and still remains one of the greatest gifts I've ever had, because I've got to meet Anna Hoover and Liisa Holmberg, and so many incredibly talented people who just constantly give me so much joy, happiness, and many things to think about. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce briefly, because we have about 40 minutes, the panelists today, Liisa Holmberg. If you can join us on stage, please. Anna Hoover, filmmaker. Emile Hertling Péronard, producer extraordinaire. And Elle Máijá Tailfeathers, filmmaker and actor. Our panelists for today. Thanks very much. It's such a great pleasure and joy, and also want to extend my thanks to all their incredible opening remarks and yoiks shared. How touching to be reminded constantly that the heart really is very much at the core of what we do, and how we feel, and indeed how we create and share stories and come together. And I know my heart's always full when we do things like this. I mean, the past day we've been talking about how wonderful it is again to be able to come together in this way after so many years of being apart and then being together for so many years before that. So really wonderful. Liisa Holmberg, let's start with you. And
I'm not yoiking, no.
okay, so there goes the first question. So I'm curious if you can, I want you to share a bit more information about the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, because this is something internationally that is absolutely revolutionary and also really essential. So tell us a bit about it, why it was founded, and speak about its mandate.
Yeah, we started the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund 2018 in Kautokeino in the Indigenous Film Conference. And the reason why we need it and we need that is that the national borders are so high between Alaska and Canada and Greenland and Sámi land and Russia. So that our filmmakers, when they are working, they can't work together in horizontally in the Arctic. They have to go and back south, the capital of Finland, Norway, Sweden, and maybe Denmark, and so on, the funding. So we were thinking we urgently need our own money in order to work together, in order to make our stories in our own ways and telling the stories in our own ways. And why it's important to make the stories in our own ways is that the story you are telling, it's creating the future of your people, yourself and your people. So you never ever give anybody else to tell your story, because there is the future. And so it's very important to get funding to our own young people to make films together across the border in the whole indigenous Arctic. Yes.
Absolutely, it is. And you know, one of the things that's always important to be reminded of, as we were just earlier in the opening speeches, and that you, Mr. Chair, said so eloquently in a video that I watched again recently, that the Arctic, that the circumpolar region is indigenous territories. And the way it's structured currently in terms of funding for films, videos, shorts, series, is all along colonial borders, with colonial state film institutes really funding things. And this proposition, the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, is completely different. It's looking at the connections in a circumpolar region. Founded 5 years ago, certainly I think a little delayed because of the pandemic, but can you share just what are some of the immediate goals of the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund?
It is give the opportunity to Arctic Indigenous filmmakers. We are supporting direct by money. Money is very important, even to indigenous peoples. And then capacity building, making courses together, making bigger courses together, working with the universities. We are working very, very closely to University of the Arctic, so that our people are getting all-level education, not only two-week short course or something, but a master degree and a PhD and then scholars, and so that we have own people there. So that's also important. Then to make co-productions, to make the whole new generation to having co-productions across the border. And then opening the doors to the big film festivals, to the big institutes, to New York, to our filmmakers. Because if you are working up somewhere like in my home village, up in the Sámi land in Sevettijärvi, it's not so easy to get to Berlinale or in Cannes or in Toronto International Film Festival. But through our Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, we are trying to open the door, and we have, and we are. So our partners are Sundance Institute, Canada Media Fund, and the Nunavut Film Corporation, Greenland Film, and then International Sámi Film Institute, and then we have also a Russian partner in Sahayakutia, there in the quite east.
Thank you. And Emile, I mean, you've been part of this global industry now for quite a few years, and I'm curious if you can, again, just reflect on how things have changed, I think, and they have quite considerably in the last 10, 15 years. And yourself as a producer working in Greenland and in Denmark, I'd love to hear you reflect on how Indigenous cinema has risen in this last few years, but in particularly how Arctic Indigenous cinema has really come to the fore.
Yeah, it really has, and also just to say that I'm really happy to be here with you. I feel like I've known you guys for my whole career, and I think that we built our careers together basically, because to begin with we were just like small entities in our different Arctic regions doing what we did for ourselves more or less. But I think for me personally what changed was to come to Imaginative for the first time and meeting you, Liisa, and kind of discovering that there was a community, an Indigenous community. And we had for so many years tried to kind of, from Greenland, to make Denmark aware of us and to make Denmark interested, because that was where the money was and where we had a potential access. But it was just so difficult to keep knocking on that door where there was no one really interested in listening. And that's what changed when we came to Imaginative. We found people that were like us and stories that were like ours, and interest on a whole different level. So I think that what we are seeing now globally was actually what was already there, but like within our own community. And so I feel now that we did this together. I mean, we created the global interest together. You and all the Indigenous filmmaking organizations around the world, because we empowered each other to make bigger stories and to think bigger. And just 2 weeks ago, our new film, Twice Colonized, opened the Copenhagen Docs, the biggest documentary film festival in Scandinavia in Copenhagen, and had the main slot. And young Danish kids were coming over to me afterwards and saying, "I can't believe no one ever told me this. Why was I not told that Denmark did this in the colonial history with Greenland?" And these are just stories that we have not been allowed somehow to tell because of the structures around filmmaking. And now we have like a global audience really wanting to hear these stories and people wanting to invest in them being told. So I think things have changed massively. And I'm so glad that we're here to take advantage of that.
And I mean, you're absolutely right. And I mean, in terms of amplifying those aspirations, amplifying the histories that hasn't happened, I mean, that's something that we just sort of hear constantly in terms of responses to the stories of Indigenous-made films. You've also had some really tremendous success in recent weeks, months. What are we, April? Emile produced the Oscar-nominated short film Ivalu, which you went to the Oscars for. How has that, yes, huge congratulations. We were all very proud. But how has that particular film been, if it has been, a kind of crown in terms of amplifying sort of, you know, the stories of Greenlandic Inuit, or indeed some of the realities around climate change back home?
I don't know that it has. I mean, I'm primarily a documentary filmmaker, so making a short fiction film together with Danish filmmakers as well, should be said, was kind of like a new thing for me. But I had like a really profound moment at the Oscars with my colleague Biba. We have Biba K. Jørgensen is a Greenlandic film director and producer, and we co-produced this film together. We have a company together in Greenland, and we were standing there with our Greenlandic delegation, all the actors, and we were on the red carpet in our traditional anoaks and beadwork and looking at each other and saying, we can do this. We're definitely not out of our league here. We belong here. So I think that the effect that kind of film does have is that, you know, we put ourselves on the map in new places. And I think Oscars is one thing. Zacharias Gunuk visited our film festival in Inuk last year. That was a huge thing for me to meet him in person and to have a conversation like this with him in our theater. And he screened his latest film, which is an animated film. And there was this one very brief moment where the main character asks a question, and instead of saying yes, he does like this, because that's how we say yes, right? And Zach was like, I really wanted that in an animation film because that's never been done before. So, you know, crossing out these different areas and saying, yes, we can do this. We're here. We're making ourselves heard in animation, raising our eyebrows, but also at the red carpet at the Oscars. Yeah, let's do it.
Fantastic photos of you guys at the Oscars. It was so nice.
It was so much fun. I'll tell you all about it afterwards.
Yeah, I want those behind-the-scenes stories. And we're screening Ivalu tomorrow as part of the package at 2 p.m. Tomorrow. I believe it's up. Is it in here? It's right here. Elle Máijá, as you're pouring water, you wear many creative hats. You're a producer, screenwriter, actor, director, and she's won all of Canada's top prizes for this. I swear it has to be a record, but no one can tell me if it is or not, but I'm going to say that you're record-setting, so congratulations on that. In terms of really, I'm thinking back of Bloodlines, some of your documentary work, your fiction work, you've created both. Have you found any kind of differences, disparities, in terms of one genre or the other being more impactful to reach audiences when it comes to messages like you had in Bloodlines, for example?
Oh, man. Thank you. I just wanted to say it's really nice to be here as well, and thank you to everybody who came to hear us speak. I'm Blackfoot from Ghana, or Kainai. It's also known as the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta, and I'm Sámi from the Unangax region of Sápmi, which is on the Norwegian side, I guess you'd say. Anyway, what was the question?
Have you perceived or felt any differences in documentary or fiction, because you've created both,
right,
in terms of reception, audience reception, but some harder issues that you've dealt with in your work?
Yeah, that's a really difficult question to answer, actually. Whenever I make anything, I think about audience first and foremost, and the first people that I think of are my grandparents, my Blackfoot grandparents. They both survived residential school in Canada, and they taught me to be proud of who I am and where I come from, and to love my people and our language and our community and our land. And so when I make anything, I think about them first and foremost, and then I think about my nieces and nephews and the next generation and what I can offer them, and what my responsibility is as a storyteller and a community member. And so every story requires something different. But I try and stay accountable to my community first and foremost. How can I center my community's voices? How can I uplift my community's voices? And how can I remain accountable to my community as a member of that community first and foremost? And this panel's supposedly about climate change and climate justice and film, and the next film that I'm making is, it's about a lot of things. It's an adaptation of a short film by an Australian Indigenous writer named Ellen van Neerven, and it's set in the near future. It's speculative fiction, and it's about a lot of things. It's about neoliberalism, neocolonialism, the way that neoliberalism and neocolonialism co-opt indigenous movements and co-opt particularly like our activist movements, and co-opt our ways of thinking. And Anna Laila talked about green, this whole new green capitalism, and the ways that indigenous people, especially on the Norwegian side of Sápmi right now, are fighting the wind power there. And I've thought a lot about this idea of consent versus consultation, and so that's kind of part of this next film project is thinking about how can we move beyond climate grief and climate anxiety, because I think it's something we all feel deeply on a daily level, and climate grief is just kind of one wave of grief that our people have felt. It's kind of extraordinary to sit back and think about all of the catastrophic loss that every generation has faced as Indigenous people. And recently I was sitting with my 9-year-old niece, and she brought up the Willow Project. And it was a really difficult conversation to have with her, because she couldn't understand why in anybody's right mind we would move forward with something like this, and it was a devastating conversation actually to have with her. And so in terms of thinking about my obligation to her as her aunt, and my obligation as a storyteller from my community, how can I do something that offers hope? Because there's something paralyzing about climate anxiety, and there's something paralyzing about grief as well. And climate grief is just sort of one form of grief that my Blackfoot community in particular is feeling. We've been experiencing an overdose crisis. The opioid crisis has impacted us for 9 years now, and we've lost hundreds and hundreds of members of our community to fatal overdoses. And I live at home on the reserve, and I'm not far from the funeral home. So every week I see funeral processions, and a lot of them are young people. And it's a really heavy thing to contend with, that sort of level of grief, and to know that it permeates our community, and it's like many generations who are losing. And so really, grief is this thing that can be so paralyzing, and it's something we're all experiencing. So I question myself all the time as a filmmaker and a member of my community. How can I offer something hopeful? How can I offer something that helps us move beyond this sense of grief, this immeasurable sense of grief that we're all feeling, as well as the anxiety that we feel about the future? And that anxiety is so justified because of everything we've lost and our stand to lose. So this next film project is about love, actually. It's about love, and it's about joy, because I think that those are two very radical things that we deserve to feel as Indigenous people. It's part of the human experience that we deserve to feel love. We deserve to feel joy. And sometimes this fight, this struggle is so exhausting, because it's like there's so many things we have to fight for and fight against, and also, live with this burden of grief every day, and live with this burden of anxiety of what the future holds. And so I've thought a lot about the concept of love and joy, and how I can center that in my work moving forward. A lot of the work that I've done in previous years has been very heavy. It's looked at violence against Indigenous women. I've looked at the opioid crisis and the overdose crisis in my community, and it can be very heavy as a community member just to exist in that space. And so what I've found to be transformative for me in my process, and also in terms of what I can offer the audience, like back to your question, is I think love and empathy and joy. And so this next project is about how we can move beyond this paralysis of climate grief and grief of everything else we've lost, and how can we think about love as a verb? How can we make it an actionable thing? And so yeah, the next film is a love story, and it's about the ways that we are essentially the culmination of generations of ancestral love. You know, we're here because of the love of our ancestors. We're here because of the way that the land has loved and nurtured us since time immemorial. And if we forget that love, what do we have, you know? And so I don't know if I've really answered your question. I've kind of rambled, but I think it's really important to think about these things and honor the fact that we're human beings and we deserve the dignity of experiencing this very simple thing called love and also joy, but how that is taken from us so often because of everything we've had to experience and all of the catastrophic loss that we've had to experience. So yeah, you know, I don't have any answers really, but yeah.
I love that. I love love. That's great. And actually, if you can just quickly describe what the Willow Project is for those who may not know.
I feel like Anna might have a better...
What project? The Willow Project?
Yeah, I feel like you might be able to explain it better than me.
So the Willow Project was recently approved by President Joe Biden. ConocoPhillips has a new place where they're going to drill for oil in northern Alaska.
Thanks. Actually, we're coming to you, so this is a perfect segue, Anna. You know, you're someone who still lives in your home territories in Alaska. You're making your work there still specifically. I remember for me, the first time that I heard of climate refugees in a North American context had to do with the Nuktuk community in Alaska. And your work obviously really sort of deals in this space, and you're surrounded by this here. And as people from the South or more southerly regions, what are we missing? Is there something significant? I mean, is it as present in real life as we're seeing in the films?
Thank you, Jason, and thank you everyone for being here. And my family comes from the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, and I'm also Norwegian background. Certainly, I think that it is very real and very true. The threats that are finally being spoken about. And, you know, they talk about the canary in the coal mine. You know, these northern communities are first and foremost truly experiencing climate change. And it's so shocking to hear people still talk about it like it's not real. You know, I mean, we have, like you mentioned, we have people who are being displaced from their homes, you know. It's very, very real. And, you know, globally, we have so many species disappearing from the earth. And, you know, now, you know, salmon has been something that I've followed very closely. My family are commercial salmon fishers for many generations, dating back to the 1800s in Norway, and they moved to America and Alaska and so on. But, you know, the salmon have disappeared all over Europe, the west coast of America, California, Oregon, Washington. And we were always told that Alaska had the only sustainable fisheries on Earth. Well, guess what? The salmon are disappearing now in Alaska as well. The Yukon River was mentioned. You know, people are not able to subsist even for their families in their home. Talk about, you know, losing your way of life. You know, this is the time where we, like, I mean, summer is so just smashing with color and life in the north. And we gather together around these activities of harvest. It's how we teach. Sorry, my daughter's in the audience. Anyway, some of these rivers, these people they can't teach their children the way of life. I mean, it's so much a part of who we are that, you know, my heart aches for the buffalo people who don't have buffalo anymore. You know, I mean, to be a salmon people and not have salmon anymore is absolutely devastating. So I'm very honored to be in this place and to be able to hold a microphone, because as well, we have opioid crisis, and young people that are really lacking. I don't know if we knew we could help, but there's something missing in their purpose in life, and they feel hopeless, and we have to do something about that. And so it's really special to be a young person still who has survived this long, and to now have a voice globally and to get to share our stories. I really loved Dario's phrase from the Amazon about how each story told gives another day of life to the planet. How beautiful and how true. And so, thank you.
Thank you, Anna. No, I really, truly applaud filmmakers like you and Elle Máijá and Darlene Ponce and many others across the planet who are making work at home. It's a very different proposition. I don't live in my home community. I'm based in Toronto. And it's something very different to be embedded in community and making that work. So thank you for sharing these. I know it can be very difficult at times, and I know both of you and many others also are surrounded by love and support systems. So thank you for sharing those comments and thoughts here. Anna, another question for you. I mean, I know in America, it's often very different funding mechanisms than, say, in Canada or in Northern Europe that have similar public funding systems. And if you can share in terms of your experience with getting your films funded, which is a very different proposition, again, in the US than some other countries.
Thank you. It's very true. We don't have a national film board in America. What's up with that? That should change. Canada is a very good example of funding their filmmakers well, and so in America, it is very challenging, especially if you're young and have no experience. Take a risk on me. It's impossible almost. I mean, really, my first fiction film was funded through the International Sámi Film Institute from Norway. And this partnership, this global partnership now has been talked about, and it's a community, and we learn opportunities from one another, and it is changing, and rightly so. The film industry keeps remaking these old stories because they don't have new ones. We have stories that have not been shared on the global platforms, and we are poised and ready to tell our own stories. We don't need other people to come and do it. But in America, it is very challenging, and I write a lot of grants, and there are foundations out there, but it's a hustle for sure.
And so the question that was posed from the material about this panel itself is, how can we fight back? And I mean, there's a lot. Fight back against what? Fight back against climate change, fight back against colonial state funding mechanisms, all these different things. But an open question to anyone who really wants to respond, and thanks so much for really setting an important context for the work that you do and Indigenous filmmakers' places within community and the larger movement. But how are Indigenous filmmakers from the circumpolar Arctic specifically really what more is needed to help you fight back? Funding aside. Well, funding is important. We need more funding. Let's just establish this. Liisa.
Well, it is like Elle Máijá is saying, the most important is the love, always. The love for the nature, for each other, for the stories, for the future, for the everything. If you are lacking love, then there is no yoik. But the other thing is what is important. Why I'm answering for the Arctic Indigenous Film Fund, because as Anna told, and as Elle Máijá, and as it is in in Greenland as it is in Sámiland. The film and the film industry and making film and making stories and art, it is a livelihood for those young people who can't fish, who can't hunt the caribou because caribous are not coming home, who are reindeer herders and having big challenges. We are offering work and very meaningful work to those young people, and not only a hobby, like, okay, I'm making a TikTok and that's it. I'm not saying TikTok is not important, but still. So we are giving them a professional life. We are giving them salary. We are giving them opening the gates to the big film festivals, to the BBC World, where they can earn the living, not moving away from our home communities, staying there and waiting. I'm so sure that we are fighting back and we are getting back. The salmon is coming home. The caribous are there again, and our reindeer, they will make many, many, many calves every summer. So yes, that's my answer.
Fantastic. Our time has gone by very quickly, so unfortunately we do need to wrap up the conversation. But Anna, if you could please just set up, we're going to see Anna's short documentary, Salmon Reflections. Tell us a bit about it, and then we'll screen it.
Okay, it's also my honor to share a 4-minute film that I made during the pandemic. And I was hoping to share joy, but about salmon, and we hold great reverence for this species where we live, and we know them well, and they really feel like family, and their flesh becomes ours. We eat them almost daily. Our lives are truly intertwined, and this is beautiful. A lot of drone footage from Bristol Bay, Alaska, home of. I think we had 75 million salmon return last year, if you can believe that. So it's one of the last remaining healthy ecosystems on Earth that supports salmon. So I'm honored to share that with you.
Please join me in thanking the panelists for being here today. Thank you all so much.